Hey folks, it's Chili. I make fan concepts for Age of Empires 4. Today we're going to be taking the video in a slightly new direction. It's going to be more of a lecture, a podcast style, going to be a little bit more casual, and this is going to allow me to go a little bit deeper into my insights and my thinking behind these designs. It's also going to let me nerd out about the historical inspirations behind everything. If you like my concepts, you can check everything out on the website, which is in the description below. And if you want to see more of these, please leave a like and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into it, how I would design the Byzantines in Age of Empires 4. Alright, so the Byzantines, they were a fan favorite back in Age of Empires 2. If you know your history, you'll know that these guys were historically the Eastern Roman Empire, continuing through the Middle Ages, one of the most dominant powers in the Mediterranean. So what makes them cool in Age of Empires 4? Well, here's how I'm imagining them. One, they have this really unique structure known as the aqueduct. It's going to be the lifeblood of their empire. Two, they have really awesome unique units that no one else has, such as the cataphract, as well as the flamethrower. Three, they have a very unique playstyle. They're a slow-moving juggernaut, super tanky, super strong frontline units, but not very mobile. 4, they have a really strong boom economy, very similar to the Abbasids. They want to build a lot of town centers, they want to collect relics, and they want to build a lot of villagers. And 5, to protect that crazy economy, they have the best walls in the game. Not only are these walls stronger, they also give buffs that let you fight better on them. It's a 2-star difficulty civ. Most of the standard unit roster is here, as well as the landmark system. It's going to work exactly the same as other factions. I'm starting the concept in the year 674 CE. This is a very important year in Byzantine history. It's when the Byzantines were able to successfully defend from the first siege of Constantinople by the Umayyad Caliphate. They would come back 40 years later, do a second siege. Both sieges were repelled because of a secret new invention known as Greek fire, which was able to destroy the Arab navy and secure the survival of the Roman Empire for hundreds of years afterwards. The end date here is 1453. This is the year when Mehmed II, the Ottoman Sultan, was finally able to break through the walls of Constantinople and finish off the Byzantine Empire. Famously, in order to break through the massive walls, he had to build the Great Bombard, which you actually see in-game. This faction's strengths are a strong, tanky frontline military, they got flamethrowers, they have a fast booming economy with aqueducts and relics. They have the best walls in the game. Their weaknesses, however, is that they're not very mobile, they're very reliant on gold and stone, both to hire mercenaries and to build defensive structures. They're relatively weak to ranged units, especially crossbows, and their standard troop types, the spearmen, the archer, the horsemen, are relatively lackluster. They're not going to get a lot of bonuses for those guys. Their first faction trait is the unique structure known as the cistern. These are 3x3 size structures that provide 25 population, and you can start building them in the Feudal Age. You're only limited to 2 of them, so they're very similar to the Chinese village, which also kind of serves as a super house. Historically, cisterns were these giant underground vats that they would use to distribute water throughout the city. If you were to go to Istanbul today, you can actually visit these things. They're still standing. They actually emptied out all the water from them. You can walk through them. It's kind of like these giant underground vaults with all these pillars in them. It's really cool. But the way they got water into these things originally was through the aqueduct system. So the aqueduct of Valens was built back in the Roman period. Essentially, it was there to feed the citizenry of Constantinople. Constantinople had about 400,000 people living in it in the medieval era, and they needed some way to get access to fresh water, and everything around them was salty seawater. So what they did was they piped it down from the Thracian mountainside and then brought it all the way over into the city and then distributed it from there. So similarly, the aqueduct is going to be the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire in this concept as well. It costs wood to build, and it's going to extend kind of like a wooden palisade wall. You can kind of have it wind around through your base. Everywhere you build it, it's going to project a influence. Every civilization in AOE4 has some kind of influence mechanic that kind of determines how you want to lay out your base. So for the Byzantines, it's going to be the aqueduct, and what that influence does is the next faction trait, which I'm calling Roman Restoration. Historically, since the fall of Rome, there's always been this idea of Roman renewal, Renovatio Imperii Romanorum. The idea is that we need to bring the Roman Empire back to its former glory. And the Byzantines, as a theme for the civilization, they're going to be an empire in a long state of decline, and as you're building out your civilization, you're actually rebuilding the glory of the Roman Empire. That's kind of the theme I'm going for here. So each landmark, cistern, and town center that you build within the influence range of the aqueduct will allow you to build towards additional tiers of Roman restoration. So this is going to function very similar to the Abbasid Golden Age mechanic, where there's different tiers that you can unlock. And the tiers here are, with just one structure, there's not going to be any bonus. With 2 structures, so for instance, if you have a town center and a cistern attached together with an aqueduct, your villagers are going to be a little bit cheaper. When you get to 4 structures, like say a town center and 2 landmarks, or 2 town centers, a landmark and a cistern, your villagers are going to be 40% cheaper, and all of your structures structures are also going to be a little bit cheaper. And then finally, at 6 and more structures, you're going to have 60% cheaper villagers and 20% cheaper structures. So this means your town centers are cheaper. This means your keeps are cheaper. Your walls are cheaper. So the Byzantines really are encouraged to connect to their aqueduct system so that they can get access to these cheaper benefits. This is really the heart of what enables the Byzantine boom. The next faction trait I'm calling border guards. Wooden palisades and stone walls will have increased sight range, and additionally they'll provide an aura that grants ranged units bonus movement speed and range. Thinking behind this is that I wanted to give the Byzantines stronger stone walls in some way, as historically the walls of Constantinople were some of the most impenetrable walls of anywhere in the world. But if you look into professional play in AOE4, walls really slow down the game, especially stone walls. It makes the game a lot less fun to watch, a lot less fun to cast, and a lot less fun to play. So I wanted to get around this, and I came up with the idea of increasing their vision range, inspired by something that happened in history. If you remember watching Lord of the Rings, the beacons of Gondor were these giant bonfires that they would light on the top of these mountains to send a signal all the way across the empire. That very same thing happened in history in the Byzantine Empire. They would have these bonfires set up on the mountaintops across Anatolia and then send a signal all the way to the capital in Constantinople. Additionally, the men that were guarding the border, they were known as the Archery. These were swashbuckling, adventurous types of men. A lot of songs were written about them. It's a very romantic area of Byzantine history. And so I wanted to highlight that with this border guard mechanic. Their next trait is called Varangian mercenaries. The Varangians were essentially what the Byzantines called the Rus, which lived just a little bit north of them. They were heavily influenced by Byzantine culture, and a lot of them came down and served as mercenaries and imperial guards for the Byzantine emperor. So every faction in AOE4 has some kind of thing going for them in the Feudal Age, and for the Byzantines that's going to be the access to the Varangian guard as a unique medium infantry unit, and I'll be going into that in detail when we look into the unit section. And the last trait I'm giving them here is called flamethrower emplacements. So instead of having bombard emplacements in their keeps, the Byzantines are going to have flamethrower emplacements. And what's cool about this is that while bombards are able to deal massive amounts of damage at a really far distance, flamethrowers are going to be much shorter distance, but they'll let out a continuous stream of siege damage. What this means is that Byzantine keeps are going to be particularly impervious to ram attacks. Right now the siege meta is basically ram ranch, make a ton of rams and just a-click into the enemy base. This is a way to kind of fight against that. Byzantine keeps are going to be pretty resilient against rams, forcing people to kind of build bombards and trebuchets if they want to get around Byzantine defenses. Alright, let's get into their units. Starting with the barracks, we have a pretty standard roster here with both the spearmen and the man-at-arms. Historically, the Byzantine spearmen, they used a pike known as the Manolion, and they would stand in formation with their kite shields, kind of similar to the ancient Macedonian Phalangatites. Their men-at-arms were known as Squitatos, shield bearers. It's kind of an evolution of the ancient Roman legionary with the scutum square shield. Now they're kind of using these teardrop-shaped or kite-shaped shields. But what I really want to highlight here is the Varangian Guard. It's an Age 2 unit. It's a unique medium infantry unit, so a little bit more armored than your typical light infantry, but not completely armored like the man-at-arms. It has a slow attack but high damage, and the more they fight in combat, the faster their attack speed. So if you've seen my Danish concept, it's very similar to the Raider unit over there. After Age 3, they're going to be able to get the Sentinels buff. The Sentinels in the Byzantine military were a special elite group known as the Executores. I believe that this is a separate group from the Varangian Guard, but I kind of wanted to give a reference to it, and in this case the technology is going to give the Varangian Guard a little bit of increased range and melee armor so that they have a bit more survivability and relevance in the late game. Moving into the archery range, the Byzantines are going to have a pretty standard archery range. The Byzantine archer I think was known as the Toxitai, and the crossbowman was known as the Gastrophides. They made a lot of use of mercenary crossbowmen from Italy, especially the Genoese crossbowmen, but in Age 4 they do not have access to the hand cannoneer. Instead, they will have access to the flamethrower. So by the time hand cannons became really commonplace on the battlefield, the Byzantine Empire was already falling apart, so it didn't make sense to give them that unit, and the flamethrower will fill a similar role in being a late game gunpowder style unit. It uses a hand siphon that deals massive area of effect damage, but it does have much less range compared to the hand cannoneer. It'll move really slow, but it'll be really good at sieging. So it's kind of similar to the Chinese grenadier in this capacity. Historically, the Byzantines were able to invent Greek fire to repel the Arab invasions, but uniquely, while other civilizations around them were able to come up with some kind of firebomb technology, the Byzantines were the only ones to come up with this siphon technology that allowed them to shoot the fire like a jet. And we have a few surviving depictions of flamethrowers being used, especially relevant during siege and naval warfare. Next up for the stables, in Age 2 they'll have access to the horsemen. Historically, Byzantine made made a lot of use of light cavalry, especially light cavalry that they hired from the Balkan Peninsula. By the Castle Age, however, the Byzantines will get access to the Cataphract, which is the fan favorite unit from Age of Empires 2. The Cataphract is going to replace the Knight. It's going to have very high health and a lot of melee armor, but it's very slow moving and it'll have less ranged armor. So what this means is that this unit is really good in melee combat against, say, knights or even spearmen for that matter, but the fact that they have less ranged armor means that they're particularly susceptible to crossbowmen. Crossbowmen are going to be the bane of these guys' existence. They do have a special ability I'm calling Invictus, which means unconquered. It's a reference to the fact that the Cataphract was basically keeping the Byzantine Empire standing for a long period of time. A very powerful unit, both in history and in game. This ability allows them to take reduced damage for a period of time, and they become impervious to spear brace. So back in Age of Empires 2, the Cataphracts basically countered spearmen, which is the counter to any kind of cavalry unit. I didn't personally agree with that kind of balancing, but I do want to make a reference to that, and so in this case, the Cataphracts do perform better against spearmen compared to other Lancer type units. And you can think of being able to time a Cataphract charge to get around the spearmen and basically serve as this kind of tanky front line. The Flamed Maces technology allows Cataphracts to deal bonus damage to armor, very similar to the maces that the HRE gets for their men-at-arms. And then when you get to Age 4, you can research Tagmata. So the Tagma were basically the elite professional troops of the Emperor. They served in the capital city, and they were kind of like the core military of the Empire. And I wanted to make a reference to that, but in this case, the technology, what it does is that whenever a Cataphract kills a unit, it heals all nearby allied units. So it gives the Cataphracts a lot of survivability. You want to put them on the front line. They're there to absorb a lot of the damage, while your Varangian guards and your flamethrowers are kind of dishing out the damage. The siege workshop is going to be pretty standard. The Byzantines kind of fell apart by the time gunpowder really became a thing, so not a lot of gunpowder technology for them, but they will have access to the standard bombard. The Springald, I'm going to give them a unique technology called the Scorpion that makes their Springalds move and reload faster. Historically, the Scorpion was kind of like a smaller ballista. The Romans used it, and they could mount it on these chariots and kind of drive them around and shoot at people. Alright, for their additional technologies, in the Feudal Age, they'll have access to the Temata technology. You can also see this spelled as themes or theme. Basically, as the Empire was struggling from invasions from all sides, the Emperor decided to split the Empire up into these different themes. These were essentially provinces where the governor was also the general, known as a strategos, and he would be able to levy his own local military separate from the Imperial military. So the Imperial military is the Tagma, whereas the themes basically maintain their own regional military. And the way this technology is going to work in game is that non-capital town centers will gain bonus health and additional garrison space. So as mentioned earlier, the Byzantines really like making a lot of town centers, building a lot of villagers, and then just kind of booming out of their minds. Well, this is going to help them do that, especially in Age 2. The fact that their non-capital town centers are a little bit tankier, they have more garrison space, you can help protect more villagers as a result. Going into the Castle Age, iconography. This is a really cool technology. It's going to define the Byzantine playstyle. It's very similar to how the Delhi Sultanate can capture sacred sites starting in the Feudal Age. The idea behind this one is that similar to HRE, how they can place relics inside of their keeps and outposts. For the Byzantines, they can place relics inside of drop-off structures. This includes town centers and markets, as well as mining camps, lumber camps, mills, and any resources that you deliver to a drop-off structure that has a relic in it is going to be increased. So this means that the Byzantines are, like the HRE, they're going to be competing for those relics. When you get to the Imperial Age, the Byzantines will have access to Theodosian walls. These are super strong stone walls. The stone walls will get a visual upgrade, and they'll also get their health boosted by 75%, which may seem like a lot, but when I was doing my research, HRE actually has a technology that boosts the health of all their outposts, towers, walls, and their wooden walls by 40%. So I felt like there needed to be something to give a little bit more oomph. The thing is, with the HRE technology, I kind of forgot that it even existed, because late game, everyone's got bombards, everyone's got all these upgraded rams. You kind of don't really feel the health of these walls anyways, so the idea behind Theodosian walls is that you're going to feel the Byzantine walls a little bit more. That combined with the flamethrowers, which really help defeat rams, make Byzantine walls that much stronger. And lastly, we're going to take a look at the landmarks for this civ. So getting into the Feudal Age here. Starting off, they will have the option to build the Nymphaeum or the Athos Monastery. What the Nymphaeum is this really beautiful grotto that historically was kind of a sacred worshipping site for nymphs back in the Roman Empire. Later on, it just became a really nice fountain. And I thought this would be a very unique piece of architecture. We don't really see something like this in the game. And it really speaks to this idea that the Byzantines are all about water. And so in this case, this landmark will function as an additional cistern. So normally you only get access to 2 cisterns. With the Nymphaeum, you get access to a 3rd one. It provides another 25 population, but it also has this benefit where every cistern will now generate 10 food whenever a villager is spawned. So then if you build 3 cisterns, you get 30 food back. Your villager effectively only costs 20 food. So this is a landmark that can allow you to further boom your early game economy. The other option is the Athos Monastery. This is a reference to the monastic communities in Mount Athos, which is this really remote region in the empire. It's still remote even to this day, and the monastic communities are still very thriving in that region to this day. But they built these really awesome looking fortified churches, so I wanted to take a little bit of inspiration from that. This both functions as an outpost with the Aeroslit technology, so it's very similar to the Saharan trade network for the Malians or the Kremlin for the Rus, but it also functions as an early monastery. So normally you won't be able to build monasteries until the Castle Age, but for the Byzantines, if they get this landmark, they can start building, they get a monastery early on, which means they can also start producing monks early on. For the HRE, they can build prelates from their town center, which gives them an advantage when they want to hit Castle Age and start collecting those relics. For the Byzantines, they can't build the monks from their town center, but if you were to go this monastery, you do have the opportunity to try to compete for the relics. The moment you hit Castle Age, if you make a few monks early on, they can go capture those relics for you. Speaking of the Castle Age, let's move on to the Castle Age then. The landmarks for the Castle Age here, the first one is the Constantine Forum. This is a massive open square. If you take a look at any reconstructions of the city, you'll see that this is right next to the main palace area and the Hagia Sophia area. This is like the main town square for the city. It had this beautiful column with the statue of Constantine at the top of it. And the way I'm thinking about this is that it's going to function as a town center. So as the Byzantines are entering the Castle Age, they'll get an additional town center as mentioned before. The Byzantines really like having extra town centers. In this case, it will provide an aura and in a large radius around it, and any villagers in that area will get bonus armor. So this really helps the Byzantines kind of defend themselves from early raids, kind of supports that boom economy that the Byzantines want to go for. The other option, if you want to get more aggressive, however, is the Varangian quarters. So as mentioned before, the Varangians were the Rus that were hired as mercenaries by the Byzantines. This building is essentially the mercenary camp building. It quickly trains units. The units only cost gold, and you get access to units that you would not normally have access to. So for instance, not only do you get the Varangian Guard here, you can also build horse archers, which are the Rus horse archers, the arbaletiers, which are a reference to the Genoese crossbowmen that the Byzantines would hire, as well as when you get to the Imperial Age, you can also start training hand cannoneers from this building. So the Byzantines don't normally have access to hand cannoneers, but if they build the Varangian quarters, then they'll now have access to hand cannoneers. And lastly, as we get into the Imperial Age, there's the Hippodrome and the Pantocrator Hospital. So the Hippodrome, it's this really massive racing arena. Any kind of modern NASCAR race field kind of draws inheritance from the Hippodrome. They used to host these huge chariot races that everyone in the city would watch, and people got really religious about which team that they were rooting for. So much so that they would riot if their team lost. There would be a huge uproar and a lot of infighting whenever games are happening. While the Romans had the Colosseum and they watched gladiators fight to the death, the Byzantines, they had the Hippodrome, kind of like Ben-Hur style. The way I designed this in-game is that you can garrison up to 20 villagers inside of this building, and then based on the number of villagers garrisoned, you get some kind of bonus. So either you can generate some resources, or you get certain kinds of military buffs that you can select from. The Pantocrator Hospital, so Pantocrator I think refers to Christ the Almighty. This is actually a monastery in real life. I called it a hospital because the Byzantines were one of the first empires in history to develop hospitals all around their empire, and usually these hospitals were associated with monasteries. And so not only was the Pantocrator Monastery, did it serve as a monastery, it also served as a library, it had a cistern underneath it, it also had a hospital associated with it. So in this case, this landmark comes with a relic inside, so if you were unlucky collecting relics in the Castle Age, well, now you get access to a free relic that you can still do something with. Not only that, but it will heal out of combat units around it, kind of like the Abbey of Kings for the English, and it comes with an active ability. You can target location and heal all of the allied units in that area, even while they're in combat. So if you remember Age of Mythology, I think if you worship Aphrodite, you get access to a god power called Restoration, where you can heal all of your units while they're fighting. This is kind of taking inspiration from that. This is essentially a god power. I've been utilizing introducing more and more of these kind of god power style abilities in my concepts, I think it adds a lot of flavor to the gameplay, even if it's not very realistic. There's already a lot of breaks in realism in the game, so might as well make things a little bit more engaging. It could be a really cool outplay opportunity in competitive matches potentially, and what it does is that it makes the Byzantine military that much more survivable, which is kind of like the name of the game when it comes to playing as this faction. And of course, for the wonder, you gotta have the Hagia Sophia. This is one of the most beautiful pieces of architecture in the world, especially at the time that it was built. I got a chance to see this in person. You walk inside and you just get your breath taken away. Nowadays, there's these huge calligraphic designs on it. Back in the day, it was an Orthodox church. Nowadays, it's a giant mosque. In the past, it didn't have those spires, but it still had that amazing looking dome. And really, it served as the model for pretty much what every single church in the area looked like. The Turks would later on take a lot of inspiration from these designs, as well as the Venetians and the Italians. Hagia Sophia also served as the wonder in Age of Empires 2, and you've probably also seen it in a bunch of other games as well. Alright, and that's my concept for the Byzantines. Was there anything I missed? Is there anything that you want to see in this faction? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I would also love some feedback on this new lecture style format. If you liked it and you want to see more of this stuff, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. And who knows, we're about to get some more news about the new DLC, so maybe we'll even see the Byzantines being confirmed in the new update.